Welcome back to SouFLoTV again, everybody. It is your host with the most, hailing a legend in real life. We're talking about Pele. Pele transcended soccer superstar and Brazilian national hero dies at 82 years old. Shout out to Yahoo Sports for a beautifully written piece. Pele, the Brazilian soccer legend, widely hailed as the king of his sports, the only man to win the World Cup 3 times. He died on Thursday at a hospital in Brazil. He was 82 years old. His death has sent the entire soccer world, and especially Brazil, the nation who'd nurtured and worshipped him, into a state of mourning. It was as if a national treasure had been lost forever, because in fact Pele was one. The Brazilian government made that official declaration at the height of his powers. It kept him at his Brazilian club, Santos, where he ultimately scored most of his 1,281 goals, a still unsurpassed world record. By the end of his 21-year professional career, Pele had become an international icon, perhaps sports' first truly global star. His late career stint in New York even helped popularize soccer in the United States, but he was first and foremost a Brazilian. He was a boy from the slums of Brazil, from the slums called Palo State Slum, one of the thousands in the soccer-crazed country, reared on their dirt fields, often without shoes or even an actual soccer ball. But with like-minded friends and dreams, he grew into an artist and an assassin before he could even grow into a man. At age 17, he led the club Santos to a league title with a still standing today record of 58 goals. Then he boarded his first airplane, touched down in his first foreign country, and scored 6 times in 3 World Cup elimination games to lead his nation to its first world title. After his second of 2 goals in the 1958 final, emotions overwhelmed him. He thought back to his family, some 7,000 miles away. Did they know that we are champions? He wondered, innocently. Upon returning home, he got his answers. Lights, flying papers, joyous humans lined central streets. Some fought through helmeted guards to pat young Pele on the head to touch the superstar. Others climbed trees just to get a glimpse. Pele's fame soon spread far and wide. His rise coincided with the golden age of air travel and with an international television broadcasting boom. His talents became transportable across time and space, liable to hypnotize anyone. His face, beaming off billboards, seemingly on popular TV stations everywhere, became recognizable across the globe. At his first World Cup in Sweden, pale locals had merely been fascinated by his dark skin. By the time he arrived in Mexico for the 1970 World Cup, he toted commercials, cachets, and unprecedented celebrity. When he won it, as part of the most revered international soccer team ever, fans and journalists swarmed him. Even an Italian opponent sprinted towards him and tugged the iconic yellow number 10 jersey off his back. Even rivals were mesmerized by his greatness. I told myself before the game, He had made of skin and bones just like everyone else, is what an Italian defender said after the 1970 finals. I told myself before the game that Pele is made of skin and bones like everyone else. Yeah, they say he plays great, but he's only human. Maybe I can beat him too. But I was wrong. He was made of magic, of captivating quickness and spontaneous skill and audacity and technique and intuition. Only a fraction of it was survived on highlight reels. Visual evidence of Pele's favorite goal, for example, does not exist. His genius has largely been preserved by legend and therefore eclipsed, in the eyes of younger generations, by that of Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi. But Pele's contemporary preeminence was undisputed. Various organizations named him the greatest athlete of the 20th century. In the 1960s, some believed him to be the most famous person on the planet. Popes, emperors, and presidents sought his company. Companies sought his endorsement. Admirers everywhere sought whatever they could get. In some countries, they wanted to touch him. In some, they wanted to hug him and kiss him. A teammate once recalled. In others, they even kissed the ground that he walked on. He made his opponents want to applaud. He made Just Fontaine, the record-breaking French striker, want to hang up his boots. This Pele was the only baller who surpassed the boundaries of logic. To Romario, the 1994 World Cup winning Brazilian striker, Pele was like a god. Yet, he was only mortal and fallible. He wasted riches on ill-advised investments. He submitted to an awkward second career as a vagabond ambassador and pitchman. He had affairs, divorced twice, ruined his own marriages, and fathered multiple children out of wedlock. He refused to recognize one of them, Sandra Machado, even after she wrote an emotional book about his rejection and sued him to prove that he was in fact her father. Pele was, in a nutshell, both divine and intensely human. The boy who would become a king was born Edson Arantes do Nascimento on October 23, 1940 in the Tres Coracoes, a modest municipality in southeastern Brazil. He was raised 300 miles to the west in Bauru by his parents, Celeste Arantes and Joao Ramos do Nascimento, a housewife and a professional soccer player. Dad taught little Edson the sports. A lot of people didn't know that Pele's father actually was a professional soccer player, so he got that gift from his father, and his father was instrumental in teaching Pele the sport. They initially called him Dico. The nickname that stuck was Pele, was a schoolboy creation. Edson's classmates derived it from his mispronunciation of Pele, a pro goalkeeper. Edson initially hated the name. On one occasion, I punched a classmate because of it. He had later recalled. He eventually came around and ended up liking the name. He honed his skills. Meanwhile, on dusty pitches surrounded by neighborhood companions and friends. When they didn't have a ball to kick about, they made one, perhaps by stuffing a sock with newspaper and tying it tight with a string, or perhaps by converting a grapefruit. Pele's family subsisted on necessities. His father's soccer salary was meager. Pele, the oldest of two children, supplemented it by working in tea shops or cleaning shoes at the local train station. Then, in 1956, at the age of 15, his youth coach took him to Santos for a tryout, and everything changed. He signed a contract. He scored on his debut. Over the 2 years that followed, he became a bona fide star. Adolescence chiseled his body. Martial arts training sharpened his balance and agility. The attributes that would propel him past defenders at will. In 1958, Brazil took him to the World Cup despite a pre-tournament injury that ruled him out of the first two games. In Sweden, life at Brazilian base camp was calm. It was quiet, Pele recalled, and my thoughts could soar, he said. He bonded with older teammates. They played darts, they went fishing, uninterrupted by ravenous locals. Relatively few in Europe knew the boy from Baru by name, but that was going to change. Then they turned on their black and white television set. They sat down to watch Brazil, perhaps for the first time, on soccer's biggest stage. They saw a skinny 17-year-old playing with imagination and verve, running circles around seasoned veterans, flicking the ball through their legs. He scored the only goal of a 1-0 quarterfinal victory over Wales. Then, a semi-final hat-trick against France. A few days later, he bamboozled Sweden, popping a ball over a helpless defender's head and volleying it into the goal. His second of two goals that day, a soaring header, sealed a 5-2 Brazilian rout, and in that moment, from Sao Paulo to Sweden, from London to Lisbon, and many places in between, Pele became Pele. Before long, European giants came calling. Soccer at the time wasn't the Eurocentric commercial thing that it is today, but the likes of Real Madrid, Manchester United carried sway. They approached Pele and Santos, which is the club, with 7-figure offers. Santos accepted one of them from Inter Milan. Pele allegedly signed a contract with the Italian club. Then its chairman, Angelo Moratti, received a phone call. On the other side of the phone, Moratti's son would later recall, there was a man very worried for his safety. It was Santos' chairman. News of Pele's impending transfer had reached the public. As soon as it was heard in Brazil, Massimo Moratti said that people went crazy, wild against the leaders. In other words, he is our national treasure and he is not to be traded to anyone else. The only solution, given Pele's importance to Brazil, was to tear up the contract. The Brazilian government soon declared him a national treasure, and national treasures don't become exports. Pele stayed at Santos, winning South American titles in 1962 and 1963. His star power also allowed Santos to tour Europe, sometimes merely for exhibition matches. There were also intercontinental cups, newly conceived contests between the South American and European champions. Pele and Santos won those two, topping Benfica in 1962 and AC Milan in 1963. Throughout the 60s, through fame, although fame began to wear at him, Pele began traveling more for commercial engagements than he did for sports. It strained his relationship with Rosemarie dos Reis Cholbi, whom he had married in 1966, but eventually divorced in 1982. Pele later admitted to sleeping with other women while they were a couple, both before and after they were married. Soccer also began to wear on him. Opponents who couldn't stop him turned to illegal measures, crunching ankles, bruising his hip checks, twat to his shin. Football has become ugly, Pele said at the time. A fluke injury knocked him out of the 1962 World Cup, which Brazil went on to win without him. It was the brutish tactic, on the other hand, that knocked him and Brazil out in 1966. If you can't stop him, crunch his ankles. He had entered that World Cup a 25-year-old megastar. He exited in pain after 3 games and 2 losses with a gold necklace and black towel draped over his bare torso. He later stared out the window of a team bus, his chin in his hand, his face in a sullen look. Soccer's joy had been stolen. In the immediate aftermath of the defeat that sent Brazil home, he told a reporter, "I don't intend to play in a World Cup ever again." 4 years later, internal and external forces dragged Pele back on those words. "I was really torn. I didn't want to play in the 1970 World Cup," Pele said in an interview for a recent documentary. "I didn't want to repeat what had happened in 1966. I wasn't sure. I was worried. But Brazil yearned for him. Fans yearned for him. The country's fascist government yearned for him too. The military dictatorship, which began terrorizing Brazilian citizens in 1968, pressured Pele to return to a team that it used to promote patriotism and nationalism. Ultimately, though, I also missed it," Pele said of soccer's pinnacle. "I just wanted to be remembered. I wanted to be at the top again." So he returned, and the sport celebrated and savored its final glimpse of the king. Brazil rolled through the tournament. Pele wowed with goals and eyes in the back of his head assists. He even wowed with 2 misses. During a group game, he picked his head up in the center circle, saw a Czech goalkeeper wandering, and let fly from midfield. During a semifinal, he skated around a Uruguayan keeper without even touching the ball. He sent both shots wide off gaping goals, as if to offer necessary reminders that yes, I am earthly. I am a human being. He had sometimes doubted his own abilities to conjure brilliance out of nowhere. He had glanced at flag-waving Brazilian fans chasing the team's bus and think about the millions watching on small TV screens and in public squares back home, and he'd get nervous. Before the 1970 World Cup final in Mexico City, his emotions stirred. He prayed. Then 18 minutes in, he rose above Italy and headed Brazil into the lead. Late in the second half, when he received the ball at the top of the box, the universe seemed to freeze and hold its breath. Pele casually turned, fed a pass to a rampaging fullback in stride, and capped Brazil's 4-1 triumph. As the final whistle neared, fans, photographers, Italian players began positioning themselves for the storm. When the whistle trilled, they sped towards him and hoisted him on their shoulders and carried him around a chaotic Estadio Azteca field, Everybody privileged enough to witness Pele's final goal act wanted a piece of the newly crowned three-time world champion, the only one soccer has ever known. And Pele himself, he was overjoyed. At this time, he was only 29 years old. Pele retired from the sports in 1974. He returned a year later, reportedly in need of money. A business deal had backfired and left him $1 million in debt. The New York Cosmos agreed to pay him a then whopping $7 million over a 2+ year to play soccer, but also to promote the sports in one of its great untapped markets, the United States of America. Pele did both of those things. Americans flocked to his introductory news conference and to his games. In his first month stateside, 20,000 fans crowded into the 12,500-seat stadium in Boston. Some of them mobbed Pele after a goal and accidentally injured him, sending him off in the 79th minute on a stretcher. Pele recovered, and 2 years later he led the Cosmos to a North American Soccer League title in his final professional season. They then sold out Giant Stadium for one last curtain call, a friendly between the Cosmos and Santos. Pele played a half for each team. During the second, rain began to fall. The following day, the Brazilian newspaper headlines proclaimed, "Even the sky was crying." Pele did not, however, disappear from public view. The financial problems that led him to America followed him into retirement. He cycled through managers and investments, each finding a new route to mistrust or collapse. A construction venture went bust. A sports marketing company descended into scandal. Pele, seemingly seeking to recapture lost earnings, began shilling a range of multinational products, including Subways, Coca-Cola, MasterCard, Viagra, Nokia, Petrobras, Hublot, Santander's, Volkswagen, and even his own coffee brand, Café Pele. He delivered into politics and diplomacy as well. He spent 3 years in the 1990s as Brazil's first Minister of Sports. He worked as an ambassador for UNICEF and the United Nations, advocating on behalf of the environment and against rampant corruption in Brazil. Yet when Brazilian streets filled in 2013 to protest that corruption, and object to the government's spending on the 2014 World Cup instead of a much-needed social services, Pele initially urged citizens to forget all this commotion, all these protests. He later corrected himself, tweeting that he was 100% in favor of this movement for justice in Brazil. Critics, though, urged that his efforts to help countrymen struggling in poverty had been far too superficial and sporadic. In other words, they thought Pele had sided with government officials too much and he was not for the people. They noted that his initial comments fell in line with his long history of cozying up to the authorities in the name of soccer. Late in his playing career, after the Brazilian government fell to a military coup, and as the dictatorship cracked down on freedoms, Pele posed for pictures with the dictator Emilio Medici and sought him out for a beaming hug after winning the 1970 World Cup. This was not pleasing to the people. His missteps outside of soccer also extended to romantic relationships. In the early 1980s, at age 40, as his first marriage officially moved towards a divorce, he began dating a 17-year-old model at 40 years old, Zuza. Their relationship collapsed after several years when, according to her, Pele began cheating on her, not beating her, began cheating on her. Almost a decade later, in 1994, he married Asiria Lemos Seas, a psychologist and singer, but they divorced in 2008. In 2016, Pele wed Marcia Aoki, a Japanese-Brazilian entrepreneur. They remained together as his health deteriorated. Multiple hip surgeries had left Pele hobbled and, according to one of his sons, depressed. In his later years, in recent years, he needed a wheelchair or he needed a walker to get around. Then, in the summer of 2021, doctors found a tumor on his colon. They removed it, but Pele spent the better parts of a month in and out of the intensive care unit. He then began chemotherapy. His health further deteriorated earlier this month, with the soccer world gathered in Qatar for the 2022 World Cup. He watched from his hospital bed as an upbeat group of Brazilian players tried to follow in his footsteps. After they danced into the quarterfinals, they posed with a Pele banner to broadcast their well wishes. "All of us here are sending you love," said the head coach, and that included non-Brazilians. "Pray for the king," French superstar Kylian tweeted. Pele responded on December 8th, "I'm happy to see you breaking another one of my records," he told. He lived to see one of soccer's greatest games, the 2022 World Cup final, a week later. He died 11 days later. His manager confirmed, with family by his side. Roughly an hour after his passing, a representative sent a brief message from his Twitter account. Inspiration and love marked the journey of King Pele, who peacefully passed away today. Love, love, and love forever. His survivors include Aoki, his wife, his sister, Maria Lucia, Nascimento, and at least 6 children: Kelly Nascimento, 54, Edson Nascimento, 51, Jennifer Nascimento, 43, from his first marriage, twins Joshua and Celeste Nascimento, 25, from his second marriage, and Flavia Kurtz, 53, from an external affair. He is also survived by enduring memories, by millions who savored his greatness, perhaps even by some who, on a radiant summer day 50 years ago, stood on tippy toes for one last glimpse. Over 140,000 fans pushed into the Estadio Maracana that day for Pele's final international game in Brazil. As he paraded around the field, flanked by snapping cameras and worshippers, spellbound by tears, they chanted a simple request: "Stay, stay, stay." And a plane flew overhead carrying a banner with 4 simple words: "O viva o rei," long live the king. An era has come to an end, and like in life, we all must go. It is not dead because Pele's legacy will live on. He has transcended. Long live King Pele.